Welcome back. This is Matt from Surf City TCG. We're building an Edgar Markov vampire deck with the goal of power level 7 to 8 and no infinite combos. If you didn't catch the previous part, I would recommend starting at the beginning. Links to the previous videos are in the description below. Let's get back into it. All right, so now we know in general what we're looking for in terms of like overall categories. I think we can come back here and take a look at the types and tags we've added, and we'll take a look at a curve and we'll see what we need to either add or remove at this point. So we've got 117 cards in the deck right now, and we've got 32 lands. So it's actually looking pretty good. I mean, I think I did a good job of restraining myself in terms of like not adding stuff that I thought we might end up cutting later. But, don't expect everything to land so perfectly like this. I've done this hundreds of times, so I have a little bit more practice. But, if you end up with like 150 cards at this point, that's not unexpected. That happens to me all the time. And that's okay. Like, I'd rather have more options. And I put a lot of stuff in considering that we might end up wanting to add and vice versa. So, let's just take a look at how things are looking. So I switched back the grouping from types and tags just to type. So I can see like, all right, we've got 48 creatures. That feels like a good number. It might be a little high, but really this deck, honestly, it might be low. We want a lot of creatures in this deck. Like that is all this deck wants to do is just pump out creatures and then make sure we have enough gas to draw more cards and therefore draw more creatures. So I want to make sure that we've got plenty of draw engines, especially like ones that can really keep our hands full. And yeah, that is by far the most important thing, that we have enough creatures and we have enough draw engines. And then like our removal and our ramp are far less important in this deck than they are in most decks, which is not normal. Like, I would say most decks is the other way around. You want to make sure you have enough removal, enough board wipes, enough card draw, and then if you had this many creatures in any other deck, I would say, wow, this is way too many. Like normally I'd say you want, probably between 20 and 30 creatures, but there are certainly decks that care a lot more about having just a lot of creatures, and it really depends. It's going to matter. This is why it's so important to analyze what does the commander do and like what are we needing based on what the commander does. All right, so I'm going to scroll down past the main deck list here, and we're going to take a look at the curve section. This is very important for Edgar, right? As I've mentioned several times, the way we're going to win or get the most value out of this deck is to ensure that we're getting that 1/1 vampire token as frequently as possible. And the best way to do that is just to play a creature on every single turn. We want to curve out really nicely. When I say curve out, what that means is we want to play a 1-drop, we want to play a 2/2, we want to play a 3/3. If everything was perfect, we'd just be playing every mana value on every turn, because if there are ever turns where you have a land untapped and you can't use it, that's not like devastating. You're not going to lose the game because that happened once. But if that happens time and time again, we'll go back to what we talked about. The underlying line here, this is really the most important thing to remember, is spending the most mana at any point in the game. So if you freeze the game in time when someone just won, and then like go back and count up how much mana did they spend at this point in the game, I think you'll find that this is true. That on average, the person who won is the person who's able to use all of their mana the most efficiently or create the most mana and use it, right? So the way we're going to win in this deck is not to create the most mana, it's to kill the ones that are trying to create the mana. So threat assessment is something we haven't talked about yet, but something that's extremely important. Aggressive decks, I think, are by far, and you may not think this, I think it's a little bit counterintuitive. I think aggressive decks in Commander, especially at this power level, are by far the most difficult decks to both build and to pilot. Threat assessment is ultra important. You have to know that, like, okay, that player just, I mean, I'm going to say something very simplistic and it's going to make it sound easy, but like if someone casts a Sky Shroud Claim or an Hour of Promise, you should be attacking them because that is, it doesn't matter. Forget what the board looks like right now. I think people get too in their head about like trying to focus on the now and say like, who's the big threat? Like so and so's got this on board, whatever. But I would challenge you to maybe flip that around and say, like, whoever's got the most land is maybe the biggest threat, Or like, I never hear people asking, especially on spell table where you can't see it. I never hear people asking the other players how many cards they have in hand, unless they care for something like Juska's Will or Windfall. In fact, like if you watch my videos, my gameplay videos, you'll see me asking that all the time because and the reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to determine who the threat is. And the calculus for that to me is like, how many cards do you have in your hand? Do you have a draw engine on board? And how much mana can you make versus everyone else? I don't really care who's got like what on board necessarily, unless it's an imminent threat to me. I'm much more concerned about who is going to just turn the corner and stabilize because it only takes a single like farewell, and then all of a sudden this player who's doing nothing all game has 7 cards in hand, has twice as much land as everyone, and how are you going to win at that point? So try to keep a better like understanding of the big picture situation instead of just worrying about like small things on the board. Smothering Tithe is a good example, right? Um, Smothering Tithe is an amazing card, no question. But if you don't have any card draw engine and you have like no cards in hand, Smothering Tithe does nothing, right? If you have no way to benefit from the treasures, like it doesn't matter. Let's say you're a blue player and you've got a single counter spell. Someone's resolving a Smothering Tithe. Like, do you counter it? I'd say like it really depends on do they have the card draw to back it up? And how many cards do they have in hand? Can they protect it? Does anyone else care about the Smothering Tithe? Because there are 2 other players that might want to remove that, right? Um, so just think about things as like, try to think about things holistically instead of like thinking, oh, Smothering Tides, I know this is a really good card, so I want to counter that. It might be the right decision to counter it if they've already got like a Black Market Connections or Phyrexian Arena in play. Then I think Smothering Tide's a great choice to counter. But if they've got a Smothering Tithe in play and no way to draw cards, then what are they going to do with all the extra mana? So something to think about. Okay, so let's look at our curve, and we're not going to make any decisions based on this yet. I just want to like have an idea of what the curve is looking like at this point in the game. I'd say for most decks, this is very close to what we want it to look like. This like steady increase. Usually twos and threes are pretty close to each other. I often find threes end up being the highest, and therefore that's often where I'm looking to cut. It's really important to consider your commander's mana value when looking at this too. So we don't want a ton of 6 drops because we could always play Edgar on 6 if we needed to. So like it's not as critical that we have 6 drops. So if we had a huge hole or even no 6 drops, I would be fine with that because I know we are going to want, Edgar's not the perfect example because like I mentioned earlier, we don't always want to be playing him. But in most decks, like especially decks where you want your commander out for sure, if your commander is 3 mana, that makes other 3 mana cards way worse because you don't want to be playing those other 3 mana cards, right? You want to be playing your commander. And sure, there can be time to play the other 3 mana cards later, but the ideal situation is that you're curving out and playing a 4-on-4, a 5-on-5, and so on. So it's just a good thing to think about is like, what is my commander's mana value? And just remember that commander is always going to be in your hand, basically. It's in the command zone, right? But it's just like it's in your hand. So we don't need a 6 drop because we have a 6 drop commander. So our curve is looking good for this deck. Quite good, actually. Like the one thing I would have been concerned about before we even looked at this was that we had a lot of 1 drops and a lot of 2 drops. So I think we need more, right? This is not enough. We have a lot of threes already, and then our fours may be a little high. Having, 14 fours is a little iffy. One interesting thing you can do, which I want to talk about, it didn't recommend deflecting SWAT to us. Actually, deflecting SWAT's pretty bad in Edgar, shockingly, because again, we aren't often going to be playing him. So, we don't get the advantage of deflecting SWAT being free if our commander's in play because often our commander will not be in play. So I'm actually not going to add deflecting SWAT for that reason. I'll just put in considering that I want to show you guys what I was going to say anyway. So let's put it in. So normally what I do is, and you've maybe seen this on my other deck lists, is Moxfield has this cool feature where you can change the mana cost. So I don't like to see deflecting SWAT in my threes because I never play it as a three. You might do it as sometimes, like it can come up, but in general, I like to see it as a zero. So I will change it to zero like this, and it tells you what it's going to look like. So if you forgot, you can just base on the original cost, just use these brackets for the net values. And then when we look at curve, now we've got a zero. Look at that. We have a 100% chance of playing this on curve. Not really. We need our commander to play. Down Moxfield. Um, but I find this to be useful, especially when or if you knew you always wanted to play Agate Instigator with Offspring and you never want to make an exception, you could, change this to RR, right? I'm not going to do that, but this is something you can do if you want. Another one that I often change is Blasphemous Edict. Actually, Edict I haven't been changing because it's a little harder, but Blasphemous Act I usually change to a single red because, I'd say 90% of the time you're going to get it off for a single red. So something to consider. We might come across some that I forgot about that will change the map cost along the way. But yeah, I'd say based on looking at this, we're looking pretty good. I would probably want to avoid adding threes at this point because we have quite a lot. And I want to avoid anything like 3+ at this point. Or we want to at least really dive in. And we'll do this at the end when we get to the final cuts and refinements. I'll switch over to sorting this by mana value. And I find this can be a really helpful way to just figure out what to cut or to look at our heavy stuff altogether, right? But for now, we're going to keep it on type. Head back to curve. Understand that generally we're looking to add more low value stuff, ones and twos. Threes we don't need, fours we don't really need. That's not to say we shouldn't add a card if we really decide that we missed it and want it. But I'd say in general, we want to probably get these ones and twos up a bit higher. I would love to see just a straight line across here so that we could go one drop, two drop, three drop. Threes could be a little bit lower because the ones and twos can combine to a three, right? Cool. So let's switch over to our types and tags and see based on our template how we're doing. So, you might ask yourself, well, you didn't talk about how many life gain cards you want, how many anthem pump cards you want, all that stuff. Because that stuff's all deck dependent, right? So there's no just heuristic that's going to work for every deck when it comes to that stuff. You just have to analyze that on a case by case basis. So in terms of the major categories of the ones we looked at, those are the ones we want to take a peek at. So mana and ramp, card draw and draw engines, removal and board wipes. Protection, I guess we can take a look at too. So let's look at mana and ramp first. So we've got 6 pieces right now, which is more than I expected to have. And no, I don't think we're going to run land tax. I do think it's an incredibly good card. Oh, let's get difficulties out of here too. I do think land tax is an incredibly good card. I just think this is not really the deck where we want it. So we're gonna move that one to considering. And since I added the Enlightened Tutor at the same time, the Enlightened Tutor is since it can find the One Ring, it's a pretty big deal. Let's leave that one in for now, I'd say. Yeah, I'm gonna leave Enlightened Tutor for now. I think It's a little bit lighter of a tutor, even though we're using to find the One Ring most of the time, I would say. But in a deck like this, you got to be careful running these cards. You really want to make it worth your while because this is card disadvantage, right? You're spending a card to, yeah, you're tutoring something, but this is not demonic tutor where it goes into your hand. This goes on top of your deck. So, first of all, there's a very small chance opponents can disrupt that, like by milling you or something. That won't come up very often. But more importantly, it's like you still have to draw it. This is taking the place of the card you would have drawn the following turn. So I'm sure you've, well, I'm not sure, but you may have been in a situation where you've tutored for something and you're like, yeah, I draw this card I really wanted, but oh shit, just realized I was also like needing to draw a land, and now I've basically guaranteed I'm not going to draw a land because I've tutored something else to the top. So that's something to consider when like playing a card like this. But I think when you're running a powerful draw engine like the ring, the One Ring, you're easily going to make up for that, or you're finding Skull Clamp, or you're finding Black Market Connections. Like any of these things are going to definitely pay you back for that card you lost initially. So we added some new stuff. So as soon as I see untagged, I'm going to go in and tag it. So this is the red land. Wow. Yeah, red land. This is land destruction. And keep it all offset. Let's keep happening. And this is creatures without flying can't walk this turn. So what are we going to use for that one? Say if you know it. Trample evasion. So a lot of times when I'm running these MDFCs, actually did I mark it as MDFC? I should do that too. I forgot that. What's that? Um, MDFC stands for Modal Dual Phase Card. It means these cards, like Sunder and Eruption, that you can play on the front side or on the other side. It's modal. And these, especially the ones that come in untapped, these can basically just be swapped out for land. So Moxfield will count them. Like this number will include the MDFCs. But here, see it says 32 down here, but it says 31 here because it says 32 including MDFC. Um, I guess we can consider some other MDFCs since we're looking at this. I don't think we maybe want any of them in this deck because they're all extremely good. Like, which enchanter is the one that I'm most likely to consider? I don't think it's a vampire, unfortunately. If it is, it's a slam dunk. Yeah, so like, like we can replace the planes with this, but I suspect we're going to be light on basics. And that's the only reason I wouldn't run this is because like, what do we cut for it? We've already got 31, 32 land, and I only have one of every land in right now, right? Including one of each basic. So, to me, it's kind of looking like this mana base is perfect right now. I don't know if I even want to change it. It just worked out that way because again, I've built so many of these decks, so don't expect it necessarily to be so easy for you. And what I'll do at the end maybe is cut some of, like, I'll cut the dual lands since I know not everyone has access to those, and maybe I'll cut the other fetches and show you guys how you could build them at a base, like on a little bit more budget, because obviously not everyone has $1,500 worth of lands. And this might not be cheapest by default, so you can always go to more here, update to cheapest, and see. And then just quick side note, we don't have any preferred printings yet because this is a brand new account. But on my regular account, I always go in, like if I have a specific version of something like that I like to use, I can click here, go to switch printing, select the one that I like the best. For example, I have a judge foil, which is beautiful and I love to use it. So I like to use it. And then I can go add to my collection. By the way, you can import your entire collection if you've got it listed elsewhere and you can get it out in a CSV or a text file or anything. You can import it into Moxfield. It's a little complicated. You have to set up your template correctly. I can help you with that though. If you're interested in learning more about how to do that and you want my help, feel free to join my Discord. Link is in the description below the video. I'll also put it on the screen here. But, there are a lot of ways you can do this with Excel and, you know, anyway, if you don't want to fuss with any of that or you don't have your collection itemized anywhere else, then you can just use Moxfield to track your collection. I personally use TCG Player's collection tool, but it's up to you. I do recommend figuring something out, especially if you're a new player and you're starting to build a collection and you expect to play for a long time. I think it's a really good idea to set up your collection so it's scalable and figure out a system before you need it. I've been playing for over 30 years and I never had a great system. So things just got piled and I had boxes everywhere. I think that's most people's story. And I recently underwent a project to get everything organized. It took me like almost 2 years and it was like several hours a night, just, sorting cards, logging things, typing. It was a bear. So if you want to get ahead of that and set up a system that works for you in advance, that will save you tons of time in your life. And I can help you understand like the best way to do that, or I can even make a video. If that's something that sounds interesting to many of you, please let me know in the comments and I'll look at producing a video on that. But I did type out a pretty extensive explanation of this in my Discord. So if you join my Discord and go to the FAQs resources, I actually explained how I do all of my collection organization, and I posted all the links to the products I use, so it's pretty extensive. So if you're interested in this, you can join my Discord using the link in the description, and you can see all of this. All right, so yeah, if you wanted to add this to your collection, and then you can click the Set as Preferred Printing button. That way, like, if later I wanted to update to cheapest, it's going to change this to the cheapest, which is $250 instead of $100. But if I remove Living Death and just add it, it should default to my preferred printing, which is kind of nice, right? Let's just switch this back to cheapest. We can just use cheapest. Okay, so where were we? Sorry for the tangent. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, so let's switch back to types and tags and see what we're looking like. So mana and ramp, we've got 5 pieces right now. This isn't really ramp, but I still like it to be in this section. So really, I like I mentioned earlier, I don't care about mana and ramp for this deck exclusively. Normally, this is the first place I look at anyone's, like if anyone asks me to review their deck, this is immediately where my eyes go. This is one of the only decks that you'll hear me say this, but I don't care about. I mean, I'm even like thinking we card Arcane Signet because I don't want to be playing Arcane Signet on turn 2. I want to be playing a 2-drop and making a vampire. So I'm going to just fully lean into this. It's important to understand that none of this is set in stone. I could be, and very well might be wrong about this. Okay. Like it's happened many times. You guys don't necessarily see it, but I will like finish a deck list and have an idea and run the deck and I lose. And I'm like, okay, well maybe that was just an anomaly. I'll run the deck again, I'll lose. And I'll be like, okay, I was wrong. We do need an iron ramp in this deck. It's not working out the way I expected. But you're not often gonna know that unless you just try it. So sometimes you just have to go for it and see if it works. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna remove Arcane Signet. Dark Ritual. I'm gonna leave it for now, but I don't know. I'm iffy on this right now. It's gonna depend how much access we have to card draw, and running a few like practice hands like Gold Fishing, which we're gonna do before we play our game, should help us understand like if this card's actually gonna be good for us. So let's skip mana and ramp for now. We can come back to it. Next category is the card draw and draw engines. So draw and draw engines. So we've got 5 and 11. So I think we hit our number, right? I said 10 to 20. So we're right in that. Um, Now the question is, which of these are we not maybe actually going to end up wanting, if any? So I'm going to just re-look at each of these cards. And at this point, I might want to switch over from not the grouping, but the sorting. So right now it's sorted by name alphabetically, but a lot of times you're going to want to switch it over to mana value. So you can understand like what the progression looks like of your card draw. So for example, we've got 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 5. So nice little like curve out there, right? And then here we've got 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So a lot of threes. We have three different draw engines, or sorry, six different draw engines that cost three. It's highly likely we want to maybe cut at least one of those because it's too much, right? If we draw two of these, that's not great for us because we can't play them on curve, if that makes sense. So the ones I'm considering cutting of these six are probably like, I just don't know about this card. I guess like, how much better is Enduring Innocence than Preacher this gives him? So this is a 3 mana 2/4 Death Touch that makes a 1/1 immediately when we cast it, right? From Eminence. And then it worst case scenario makes a 1/1 when it attacks. Best case scenario, we draw a card when it attacks. So if we can ensure we're always drawing a card when it attacked, I would be all about this card. However, it has to attack when we have the most life or tied for the most life. See, I'm not confident that we're going to be at the highest life total, like pretty much ever. I mean, we will sometimes. We do have a lot of life gain, right? Like if we look back to life gain, look at all these life gain sources, right? But these aren't going to be consistent. Like, we're not playing something like Soul Warden or Soul's Attendant or Authority of the Consoles, although Authority of the Consoles might actually make the cut in this deck because, first of all, the life gain's nice, and the fact that we might run that and Blind Obedience, I think both of those are a strong consideration for this deck because causing our opponent's creatures to enter tapped is huge for us, right? It makes it so much easier to get attacks in, and I think that could make it worth it for both of these. Not to mention that we might have some synergy with life gain. So let's just tag these. Life gain. We're going to call these stacks tax silence, and that's it. And then blind obedience is nice too because it can turn our like cheap cards into damage later. That can also gain us life potentially. Plus it causes artifacts to enter tap, so it kind of hoses a lot of like treasure decks or decks that are running a lot of mana around. So we'll put life gain, we'll put stacks, and we'll also put groups left because of extort. Extort is anytime you cast a spell, you can pay either white or black. And if you do, everyone loses one, all opponents lose one, you gain as much as you dealt. So three if there are three other players. Okay, so I got distracted. Where were we? Oh, we were looking at card drawing. So I'm liking the look of all of these cards. Painful Truths is, I suppose, a maybe, but I don't really want to cut any card draw right now, so we're not going to. Another one we can consider too is Stinging Study. This is a phenomenal card, especially if your commander is 6 mana value or higher, even 5 or higher is a consideration. It's basically 5 mana, instant. You draw X, lose X, where X is your commander's mana value. It doesn't matter if it's in play or on the command zone, or it doesn't matter at all, right? This is draw, draw. We may not want it because it's 5 mana, but if we have to slow down for a turn to play this, that's not always terrible, right? Sometimes with an aggro deck like this, you want to have a less proactive play because you already have the winning board state and you just want to hold up a piece of protection like Teferi's Protection. And then having a spell you can cast if you don't need to play the Teferi's Protection, something like Stinging Study, which is an instant, that can be huge. Or you just like don't want to overextend. I don't want to commit more to the board right now because I already have a really good board state and people are going to want to play a board wipe right now anyway. So stopping playing stuff for a turn can sometimes be the right play. And then having a slower or less like development play like Singing Study can be really powerful for you. moving on to our draw engines, we do have quite a few here, but I noticed that like a couple that I expected to see weren't suggested to me. So even if you weren't aware of that, I still think it's worth taking a minute for the very important categories and ensuring that we're seeing all the best options that are available to us. So for example, the One Ring had not been suggested to us because I guess not a lot of people are running the One Ring in their Edgar decks, which makes no sense to me. But I mean, that's what we saw, right? And know that Trouble in Pairs is one of the best draw engines in these colors, and it has not yet been suggested to us. So I want to expand our search to ensure that we're seeing all these really good options because the EDHrec button, while it's great to give us some common suggestions that we might want to include, it's obviously missing some things. So what I'm going to do is flip over back to the Scryfall tagger, and we're going to take a card that we really like the One Ring, and I've already searched for it here. And I'm going to take a look at some of the tags that are on here and see which one we might be interested in looking for options on. And I think the one we want is repeatable draw, right? So I'm going to flip back here. I'm going to go back up to the advanced search, and I'm going to put in that O tag. It has to have the hyphen in between. And then I'm going to tell it to order it by EDHrec. So I want to see the repeatable draw engines in these colors, and it is only going to show the colors of the commander by default. So you're fine there. And I want to see them by most popular first. So let's try this and see what we get. If we wanted to like avoid a certain type of card, like let's look at the results and see if we can refine further before we continue looking. Esper Sentinel is one that might be worth considering, even though it's not a vampire. Let's just throw it in. I think it's probably good enough. But let's say it was giving us some things that we really didn't want to see for some reason. I don't know if there's a great example of that. Braids might be a really good fit in this deck, actually. Let's just put that in for now. I want to be really cautious about non-vampire creatures we add, but Braids is such a powerful draw engine that it could be worth it anyway. Um, anyway, what I wanted to say that I haven't been able to mention yet, but is really useful to know, is you can refine your searches by not only adding like other types, like I only want to see enchantment, whatever. Let me show you guys the syntax on how to do or also, because that can be really helpful. You basically put both phrases you want and separate each by or, surrounded by parentheses on the outside. So if I did this search right now, it will only show me repeatable draw engines that are either artifacts or enchantments, and it will order them by EDHrec. So for example, now it's removing anything that isn't an artifact or enchantment. But let's say I wanted to see everything that was not an artifact or enchantment. I did not want to see any artifacts or enchantments. I could just use this exact same phrase and put a minus in front of it. Now it's going to show me everything that, as long as it's not an artifact or enchantment. So we don't really want to do either of these things. I just wanted to show you guys how to do some Scryfall magic. And this, by doing this, and you can have as many of these as you want or as few of these, you can really refine some searches down to find exactly what you're looking for. So very powerful, very helpful potentially. Whoops. All right, let's just look at everything. So we don't want Arena, we don't want War Room, no top. Idol of Oblivion's pretty good in this deck. I mean, it's basically going to draw us a card every turn, but like, is a 2 mana draw a card every turn worth it? It's hard to say. The answer to that question is no, but I don't think it might be no. That's what I'm considering, 'cause that seems crazy. But there will be occasional turns where we're not making a token. For example, the turn we play Idol of Oblivion, if we play it on turn two. So I don't know. Where is Trouble in Paris? Why are so few people playing it? All right, Yawgmoth is nuts. I think we probably want him because he's removal, he's card draw, all in a package for a free sack outlet. He's just absolutely incredibly powerful. All right, it's showing us Mangara, but not Trouble in Paris. I don't even know for sure. Finally, look how far down the list. Wow, people need to get on this card. It's crazy. I think we're gonna run it. It's really just that good that we could spend a turn off to play it. Um, but I just want to skim through and make sure we're not missing anything else. Liliana is a good card, but I don't know, I find it to be a little slow. Yeah, I don't think we need any of this stuff. But, you could see, like, we could find tons and tons of stuff using these deck tags. And once you start to learn them, like, it becomes easier too. You start to remember, like, okay, I know, like, board wipes have a specific phrasing. It's like sweeper. And then we could say, I want a board wipe that can hit artifacts. It's not going to show us just board wipes that, oh, is it? I think there's no S. Yeah. So as you can see, it's not going to show us just stuff that hits artifacts. It's going to show us stuff that can hit artifacts. You could put creature, and if you don't know these, you can use the tagger, check a card that you do know, and then you can use it to find similar cards. This is like the best way to build decks, like one of the best ways. Elish Norn, I hate that it gives these Phyrexian text ones, by the way. You can see it, you just have to click on it and click show normal text, but I don't know why they would possibly. EDHrec, if you're watching this, please fix this. I hate it. Elish Norn could be a really, really strong top end for this deck. Let's just add it for now. All right. Anyway, I think we have captured all the draw engines we want at this point, or at least like the best ones. So I'm not going to worry about adding too much more. And then the last piece is board wipes and removal. So we already have 7 board wipes. This is way more than I want for a creature deck, unless they're one-sided. So we'll come back to that. Let's look at our regular removal. So we've got Path and Swords, which are the goats. Dam, I think, is pretty good in the stack, so I'm inclined to keep it, but I don't know. 2 mana to destroy a creature is just like, you know, it's good, but we could pay 1 to exile, right? And if we wanted to another cheap one, we could play Snuff Out, which is free to cast. I think, given that we're already 23 cards over, I'm going to start um, being a little, making some hard decisions now to save myself some hard decisions later. And I think Dam is not a card we need. Same thing with Shieldred's Edict. Really good card, but I don't think we're going to run it. Soul Shatter and Crackling Doom are really like some of the most powerful ways to remove like multiple targets. But I think if anything, we need some removal that can hit non-creatures because the stuff that is going to be really rough for us are potentially going to be like enchantments, like heavy stacks pieces that either prevent us from attacking or gaining a bunch of life. Like an opposing authority of the consoles or blind obedience is really brutal for us because if we're going to want to have a lot of ways to get haste, and that's something that we're going to want to look at. In fact, I should not forget about my little notepad file because we definitely want to remember this stuff. Let's add haste enablers because haste enablers and extra combats are more or less going to be like similar to an extra turn for us. We being able to attack twice is like really powerful in this deck, especially if we have attack triggers. A lot of our power is going to come from creatures ETBing or dying, but we still want to look at those options and know what's available. But anyway, back to removal. I think our removal is like none of our removal currently hits artifacts or enchantments, and that's not ideal. Um, it's not to say that like you always have to play removal that can hit those things, but I think in a deck like this, that's very it's not one dimensional, but it's very like focused in a specific way. I think, running into a problem enchantment or land, like could be such a pain. If an opponent has a glacial chasm and we have no answer for it, we're probably going to lose. We have ways around it. Like we can do a lot of our stuff. Like if we look at root slug, we'll do loss of life. So like this is damage, right? But blind obedience, extort is loss of life. Blood Artist is loss of life, but it's targeted. So if someone is protected, like with the One Ring, for example, we can't target them. So it's nice that we've got some loss of life options that can get through some annoying stuff. But we still want some answers to some problematic stuff, especially since we're running a vampiric tutor. It's nice to be able to like pull out a silver bullet that we need in a tough situation. So what I want to prioritize is, removal that can hit enchantments, let's say. I think artifacts are going to be less of an issue for us. And I think a lot of if we look for enchantment, we're going to find stuff that can hit artifacts also. So I'm going to look for, and it's also going to show stuff that can hit non-land permanents, which is the best, right? I already took out Anguished Unmaking, but I think it's not because it's not what we want. It's because it's a little expensive. So if we can find ways to remove a problematic enchantment, even if it's only temporarily, like there's that, I forget what it's called, but hopefully we'll find it with the Scryfall search. So let's go order EDHrec. So by the way, you can set this as a default. Like on my main account, I have it defaulting to order EDHrec in the Scryfall syntax. That's in the settings. So you can add that. Actually, I'm just going to show you guys how to do it because I think it's pretty useful. And then you don't have to type that every time. Account settings. Get some tags. User preferences. Yeah, here we go. So here we go. Default Scryfall query site-wide. So I'm going to say there's a couple I like to use. One is order EDHrec, and you can always switch this. Like sometimes you don't want to see stuff in the EDHrec order. I find that to be the most useful usually, but sometimes you just want to see alphabetically or by release date or whatever other like sorting you want, and you can always switch that later in the search results. This is just going to be the default. And then there's also some prefer tags. So I want to say prefer oldest. That way it shows me the oldest printings of cards first. And it will avoid showing us that Phyrexian text, for example. I don't exactly know the difference, so I'm just going to put the same on both. Okay, so now that will be baked into our searches by default. So going forward, I'm not going to bother putting the order EDHrec because it will do that by default. So what I do want to search for is OTAG, removal. Let's just put both. Let's do removal enchantment or OTAG removal artifact. So it shows us either. And it's already going to order by EDHrec, so we're good. Okay, so Chaos Warp, I think, is a card we want because it can deal with any permanent, including a land. Same goes for Generous Gift. This probably gives us enough juice to cover everything. And I'm glad we did this search because I don't know why these cards weren't suggested yet. I guess because this is an aggro deck and the deck builders thought like I don't need to bother with these effects or they're too risky. A lot of people don't like Chaos Warp because it's risky, but the chance of them getting something that is equivalent to the thing that you decided to use this on is like extremely low. So I think Chaos Warp's a good card. I do like Generous Gift over it, but I don't mind playing both here. All right. I don't think we need any of this more limited stuff. What I would look for, if anything, is something that's cheaper. So, like, let's say we don't want to sort through all of this. It's 496 results. Let's say we only want to see stuff with mana value less than 3. It's only going to show us 0, 1, and 2. So let's see how this works. All right, let's just take a look. Pyroblast and Reb are good cards. I think you could run them. I don't like to run them, but you know, especially as you get higher power, they become much more consistent. Null Mental Blast is a good one, but I think we need something more flexible in this deck where we're going to be running limited removal. We really want our removal to cover all the bases. Soul Partition's one I like. This exile's a non-land permanent, but the owner can recast it, but that spell will cost 2 more. So this is temporary, right? But man, if you hit someone's Smothering Tithe with a Soul Partition, it's pretty bad for them, right? They have to pay 6 mana for it. Like, it's pretty hard to even have the time to cast a 6 mana spell again. So this is almost like permanent removal. I don't know if it's the one we want. I kind of want to play the one. I think there's a 1 mana one for Modern Horizons 3. So that's the one I'm looking out for. I think I know what it's called, but I'm hoping that we find it in our search here. If you don't know what these cards do, it is worth taking the time to read all of them. It does take a lot of time, but like the more you do this, the more you're going to start to know what these cards are and know that you either do or do not want them. But I'm probably missing some stuff that could be good because I'm trying to go quickly here. Portable Hole. What is this? You can exile a non-land permanent only mana value 2 or less. So that's probably not good enough. Here it is, Static Prison. So for 1 mana, we can exile any non-land permanent until this leaves, right? So if they remove this, they get it back. No big deal. We get 2 energy, and then at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, which is our first main phase, we have to pay an energy or sacrifice this. So what that means is, like, even if we play this in our first main, that's fine, because we're already in the first main, so we're no longer going to hit the beginning of the first main. So we play it in our first main phase, we exile something annoying, a propaganda, the One Ring, whatever. Considering whether your removal can hit the One Ring is probably not a terrible idea. It's pretty much the thing that you're going to want to remove more than almost anything else. So let's say we exile someone's the One Ring. It's gone that turn, right? Our turn. The following turn, and now we have 2 energy. We're not playing any other energy, so you might be asking yourself, why would you be considering this card when this is not an energy deck? Well, let me tell you. So let's say it's turn 5, we cast Static Prison, exile the One Ring. We go to our turn 6. We get our attack in, whatever. We go to our turn 6. We pay our energy. We're down to 1 energy. One Ring is still gone. We get our attack. We go to turn 7. We pay a second energy. One Ring is still gone. Not until turn 8 from turn 5 do we no longer have energy to pay, and now it's gone. It this lasts 3 turns for only a single white mana. This is the exact kind of tempo, like, removal spell that we want in this deck. And I would venture to say that, like, and we can even look it up on EDHrec. Like, if we go to Edgar Mark, I'm not quite sure if we do this. I think we can see, like, how likely cards are in a deck. So if we say with, what is it called? Static Prison. Static Prison. I'm guessing it's going to be like, less than 1% of decks, but let's see. What does EDHrec say? 6 decks. So Static Prison is present in 6 Edgar Markov decks out of 22,000. So, you know, I'm a fan of this card. I could be wrong, but I think, this card has performed very well for me, and I would recommend you try it out. I think are people underestimate bounce spells, and this is very similar to a bounce spell. It, like, disables it for a while, right? They can maybe replay it, and it's the same with the whatever the other one's called, right? The one I just talked about. Spells like this are really good. Like, stuff that just gives you tempo. Like, what's the mana value of this effect? Even if they remove it, like, just removing a problematic permanent for a couple turns can be all you need. This is a really good card too that I think doesn't see a lot of play, but I'd really like exile effects in this deck. That being said, let's just put this in considering, because this cheap stuff is really what we want. We want to be able to continue to execute our game plan. I like this card too. Even though these are sorceries, like, playing sorceries in an aggro deck is a lot less bad than it is in a control deck, because we're going to be playing most of this stuff on our turn anyway, right? So, like, holding up mana is not really as important for us. I quite like this card too, and it actually might be a really good fit for this deck. I want to do some more testing of this card, so I'm going to play it. I think this card is deceptively powerful, especially if you're making a lot of tokens in your deck. Our tokens are a little less expendable. We don't want to lose our vampires, but um, yeah, this just seems really good. Repeatable removal. Yes, the controller draws 2, but we can basically use this to stack our tokens to draw 2 also, which, that flexibility is pretty nice. I want to test this card. I'm not saying it's necessarily good enough, but I like to include a couple cards that I'm just, like, doing a little bit of testing of. Okay, so the only other thing that I'm not seeing in this list yet, and I don't want to, like, spend forever just looking for it, is Unexplained Absence, the Murders at Karlov Manor card that hits a permanent for each player. I don't think we want to run that card. but I do want it in our considering in case I change my mind on that. All right. So now we have to retag the stuff. I'm so used to the stuff already being tagged. Okay, so this is removal. That's really it. I guess we could say like I'm gonna say unique effect because let's just say draw engine. It's not really, but it kind of is. For 2 mana, we could draw two by sacking a 1/1. And you could do that at any speed. So, like, if a board wipe's happening, it's like 2 mana, draw two. Pretty good. Like, I think this card's good. It also gets counters not just when you attack, but whenever two or more creatures attack. Anyone on any turn attacks with two or more creatures, it gets a counter. For central, engine. Grades is a draw engine. It's removal, sort of. Probably not, but like they might sack stuff. And it's a sack outlet for us. Got same thing. Draw engine, removal, sack outlets. Also can proliferate, which actually is not irrelevant for this deck at all. This can be like Alpha Strike in this deck, right? Because double black discard a card proliferate. If we have any of our +1 counter stuff that is putting counters on everything, like Cordial Vampire, if we have a board of 10 vampires that each have a +1 counter, Yawgmoth says now, we get 2 power for every 4 mana we spend, right? Which is not a great rate, but if you've got a board of 10 creatures that all have +1 counters, which is not impossible, it's not even that unlikely, right? Then all of a sudden Yawgmoth says, I can pay 6 mana, which is a lot, but like if you're gonna win the game, who cares? Pay 6 mana, discard 3 cards, overrun on my board. My whole team gets +3/+3. And those counters stay. They're permanent, right? So you're not going to use that proliferate ability all the time, but sometimes it's just going to be like, okay, I win, right? No one was kind of expecting that, even if you just have a handful of land. In fact, if you've got a Yawgmoth in play, it might be worth sandbagging some lands for this very reason. So just something to think about. This card is very, very powerful. Let's finish tagging. Oh my god, don't lose this version, please. Just give me a normal version. Thank you. All right, so Elishnorn is Elishnorn? Elishnorn is a board wipe and an Anthem Pump. Prism. I mean, we'll tag this as energy. It doesn't matter for this deck, but it can be relevant. Like when you're creating another deck, like it's nice to have these tags already done. So there's going to be like some noise in the list here because it's got some tags like that energy one that we don't care about, but I think it's worth it on average. Okay, so I'm going to put unique effect on this because it stops extra turns, so we don't forget that part. And then it's a draw vision. Okay, so on the stuff that can remove land, I think I mentioned this before, I like to tag as land destruction so that if I'm looking for land destruction, I know what options I have. So same for this. And then next thing, absence rated. This is just removal. I guess it's also like kind of like a token maker, but manifests or whatever these are called, cloaked creatures are not tokens technically, so it doesn't really benefit from token synergy. That being said, I will put it as token generator just so I know, because like if I was looking for a way to remove something and make a creature in some specific game, I'd want to see this as an option, if that makes sense. All right, so all of our stuff's tagged. I feel like we've bolstered our removal suite now. Yeah, now we've 14 pieces of removal, which is more more than enough, too many, if anything. So we'll end up cutting some of these down, but which ones we'll cut, I haven't decided on yet, and I want to talk a little bit more about how to make cuts, and also I want to re-examine our curve now that we've made some changes.